from my previous job and through social media.
All right, and do you find that people who have been given that second chance, do they pick up on it? Do they enjoy being part of the workforce again, or what? Describe that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. You see a change within how they react to being like on every other site and dealing with different kinds of culture, people, backgrounds, and it's heartwarming to see where a lot of their character from what they were and who they're trying to be. You know, you see the shift within the months as you progress with each one of them. So it's good.
How busy are you at the moment? And what sort of work have you got them doing?
Well, currently, so the core business is designing containers. We're basically just starting to slow down with our Christmas rush, Christmas New Year rush. And we're fairly busy. We've got about 7 to 8 clients on board, and we're just willing to get some more connection going just so I could offer some more opportunities for those that are still seeking, looking for work.
All right, well, good on you, Malcolm, and keep up the good work, Malcolm Putter there, 410 Vanning. And just a message for you, Fede, they had an e-Harley at Beach Hop in Whangamata, 0 to 100k, 3 seconds.
Woohoo!
No way. Okay, I might reconsider.
But what does it sound like?
It's silent. There you go. All right, Fede Tairo, Sally Wenley, thank you very much for being with us. I'm Wallace Chapman. I'm back tomorrow, 3:45 p.m. See you then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei, a legal bid's underway to have the results of the Cannabis referendum tossed out amid claims poor and inaccurate information confused voters. Allegations of abuse by staff and students at Auckland's Dilworth School are detailed at the Royal Commission. Dreams of turning a Southland pub into a charity hospital just got a little closer with the swing of a sledgehammer. The licensing trust that's leaving punters with little to toast. A new interactive map exposes our most polluted rivers and lakes. The four-legged visitors that could be part of the answer to loneliness and isolation among our elderly. And the weta as big as birds and their precious poop.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Kynwyn Curtis. The Prime Minister will appoint one minister to lead the response to the Royal Commission report into the Christchurch mosque terror attacks. The 800-page report will be released at 2 o'clock tomorrow, and it contains a number of recommendations. Jacinda Ardern says changes have already been made to firearms laws and work started on hate speech laws. She says one responsible minister will be appointed.
The scope of ministers involved is not limited to one. There are multiple who will need to be involved. But as you would expect, in order to make sure that we are both reporting back to the community frequently about progress, reporting to the public, to make sure that we are delivering against the recommendations.
Jacinda Ardern says the release of the report, along with the 12-month anniversary of Whakaari this week, means it could be a very difficult and upsetting time for many New Zealanders. Historical abuse suffered at the hands of some fellow students and staff at Dilworth School have been outlined to the Royal Commission into Abuse in Care. Neil Harding, who's 55, went to the Anglican boarding school in Auckland in 1977 at the age of 11. A number of men are currently before the courts charged with indecent assault relating to historical abuses at the school. He told the Commission today the culture at the school was harsh.
It was brutal. And I saw quite quickly there was injustice, there was all sorts of stuff going along that was a real shock to me.
Neil Harding says a lot of the violence was student on student. A leading epidemiologist says he's surprised and disappointed the Health Ministry is slashing the number of COVID updates it provides. The ministry sends out daily briefings with infection numbers and other information, but from this week it will be cut back to 4 times a week. Professor Michael Baker from the University of Otago says the daily update reminded the public to be vigilant. He says New Zealanders are already prone towards complacency about the threat of the virus, and this will encourage that.
And it's a small investment considering the huge cost if we get another outbreak. So I'm actually really surprised that we've made this change, particularly in the lead up to the Christmas period.
The Health Ministry says it will continue to report significant developments as they happen. The volcanic alert levels on Whakaari White Island have been lowered from 2 to 1. In an observation last week, GNS Science says volcanologists confirmed there was no longer ash coming from the volcano. The main volcanic gases, carbon dioxide and sulphur dioxide, have also returned to lower levels. But GNS says there's still hot steam and gas emitting from vents. Meanwhile, Wednesday marks a year since the volcano erupted, killing 22 people. Later on Checkpoint, health workers who helped treat the casualties tell their story. 2 armed offenders are still on the run after robbing a jewellery store at a busy Auckland mall this morning. The incident took place at Michael Hill in Massey's Northwest Shopping Centre shortly after 9:30. Kate Gregan reports.
The robbers entered the store with weapons and smashed glass cabinets before fleeing the scene with stolen jewellery. A spokesperson for the store says a lot of merchandise was taken. All staff are safe but quite shaken. Police are currently at the scene and are working to identify and locate the offenders. The Northwest Shopping Centre remains open. Ko Kate Gregan Aho.
It's 4 minutes past 5. 10 consignments of watermelons from Tonga that were expected to be shipped to New Zealand at the weekend was cancelled due to transportation problems. Local media reports that a last-minute arrangement with trucking companies to transport the melons to the wharf in Tongatapu didn't go ahead. It's unclear why the melons weren't picked up. It's believed the shipment can no longer be sent to New Zealand as every consignment needs to be freshly picked. The form of the Black Caps' 4-pronged pace bowling attack in the opening cricket test of the summer has given coach Gary Stead plenty to think about. The New Zealand side wrapped up a comprehensive innings and 134-run victory against the West Indies in Hamilton yesterday, and Stead is contemplating whether to add a spin bowler for the second test starting on Friday in Wellington. Stead says with the players he has available, the Black Caps have had to change their approach.
I think they're all bowling well enough. It's really hard to know how you separate them at the moment as well. So because they do offer different complements, and I guess with an all-rounder and Colin de Grandhomme who's been part of our test squad for a long time, not being available, then it gave us an opportunity to, I guess, potentially look at this a different way.
Meanwhile, the Pakistan cricket squad's final COVID-19 tests have all been returned as negative, and the squad will leave managed isolation tomorrow to fly to Queenstown to train ahead of the T20 and Test series against the Black Caps. Ferrari's Charles Leclerc will have a 3-place grid drop at the season-ending Abu Dhabi Formula One Grand Prix after he caused a first-lap collision in today's penultimate round in Bahrain. Leclerc admitted he was at fault for the incident at Turn 4, which involved eventual race winner Sergio Perez and Red Bull's Max Verstappen. Perez, who had to come from the back of the pack after the crash, became the first Mexican driver to win a Formula One race in 50 years. That's the news.
The anniversary of a national tragedy.
We're now a year down the track and people still need help, but that's the tricky part. It's as to who do you go to now?
Outrage over the false promise of free money.
Yeah, I feel really stinking gutted and the companies let everyone down.
To a horror of a different kind.
And the Pacific people themselves are saying we are being racially discriminated. We need to hear that.
Listen up. Morning Report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, mostly cloudy with patchy light rain. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, high cloud with a few spots of rain until tomorrow afternoon. Waitomo to Wellington, including the central high country, also Waired Upper. Periods of rain, some heavy falls from Taranaki and the central high country to Wellington. Buller, Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds, periods of rain, heavy falls in the west from this evening. The remainder of Marlborough and Canterbury mainly fine with increasing high cloud. Westland and Fiordland, scattered showers turning to rain in Fiordland for a time overnight. Otago and Southland, fine spells, isolated coastal showers spreading elsewhere tomorrow morning. And the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with occasional light rain. It's 5:07.
Kia ora and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. A legal bid's underway to get the results of the cannabis referendum thrown out. A group of more than 350 people is asking the High Court to void the vote on the Cannabis and Control Bill, claiming poor and inaccurate information generated confusion among voters. And it claims the Electoral Commission reinforced that misinformation. The bill that would have legalised cannabis was narrowly defeated, with 50.7% of those who voted voting against it and 48.4% for it. Drug reform advocate Blair Anderson is one of the people taking the case, and he says we heard far too much from the no vote during the campaign.
The failure to correct the misinformation, which Andrew Little had announced at some time prior to the referendum commencing, that they'd have a strong check on misinformation. And we saw ads in the mainstream newspapers of things like dopey dairies, which people will remember. It had cannabis leaves all over it with kids on skateboards in front of it. And of course there was no such provision within the actual legalisation and control bill to do that. In fact, it was specifically excluded. So there was elements to that. There was the things like gummy bears, the menu for kids, and various others that were publicised in mainstream media and social media and so forth. Notwithstanding the fact that there was also what I call almost stage-managed presentation of people that were, obviously smoking a joint and in hoodies, whereas in actual fact we have a mainstream concurrence with the use of cannabis. Our own health and development study here in Christchurch, 4 out of 5 respondents in that study have used cannabis in their life, and obviously most of them have come to no harm. So
who should have been, Blair, sorry to interrupt, but who should have been responsible for policing that material as you would have liked it to have been?
Well, there was an expert committee that was assembled, and part of its function was certainly to correct any misinformation. But it went beyond that. I mean, even to the extent that we heard that the Medical Association didn't approve of the bill, and then at the end of the period, just close to after, bulk of people had voted, had come out and said quite the converse, and that opportunity to explore these things was not taken by mainstream media for the greater part. We never saw the advocacy anywhere in the electoral process, for instance, of the Aotearoa Legalised Cannabis Party that had participated 9 MMP elections, and no one was consulted as to what they thought the referendum should look like. And things like R18 versus R20, for example, we disengaged the very at-risk group we were trying to protect.
So, where is the problem with that? Because a lot of people would have been engaging in discussion, expressing their own personally held opinions.
Lisa, that's why we've asked a judge to look at it. You see, I could bandy opinion after opinion, and it remains opinion. Now, the first thing, of course, is are we correct in our assumption that referring to end-of-life in capitals and cannabis in lowercase is a pejorative way to conduct a referendum? If that holds true, then it might be that the judge, I can't predict and it would be wrong of me to suggest it, to predict what the judge can do. But he is empowered under the Act to basically void the referendum. And the question then becomes, do we have another referendum? There is provision within the Act to have another within 6 months of his findings. But I think the right thing to do would be for them just to send it to the Select Committee, and then we can thrash out the concerns like I have about the R18 versus R20, for example. I wanted the opportunity to explore that. I'm a founding director of Educators for Sensible Drug Policy. We've had our play in this in influencing the outcomes in Canada. We didn't need overseas experts here. Nobody reflected the true culture of cannabis in this country, whether we look at 6 Foot Sativa or Catch a Fire or the herbs or numerous other contributions that cannabis has made positively to our communities. Because if we don't understand this...
But Blair, was that just bad campaigning?
No, not at all. We didn't call it "and cannabis." That was the Electoral Commission that called it that. That's what's wrong here. It's not what we think. It's what does the judge think. If the judge thinks this was inherently wrong and it influenced the outcome, he's probably honour bound to say the referendum is null and void. We're starting to look damn silly. That's not the result of the referendum we're disputing. We're disputing the conduct of that referendum, and I make that very clear.
But the end result is that you desire it to be void, the outcome of the referendum.
Look, it's quite possible that the High Court judge may look at this and go, no, the Electoral Commission could, get a smack over the hand for being naughty, but the results stand. That's the prerogative of the judge. He'll hear the evidence. What's really cute is he can call in the people that were responsible for some of the misinformation and ask them to validate and justify it. He can call in who he likes, he or she. I'm not assuming anything. I just happen to know who it is, but any judge in this situation would be able to call. It's a very unique setting, this. The High Court has never had to do anything like this in its entire history.
Ideally, Blair, would you be wanting it to be, the result of the referendum to be thrown out, and ideally would you like the government to push ahead with some change in legislation, not put it back to the people?
Look, it's been put to the people, and 48.4 said yes. I was disappointed to hear Andrew Little say on your own show prior to the specials being counted that the people had spoken and there would be no change, and he thought that there wasn't enough room in the specials there. But if you looked at the specials, it only fell short by a few votes when all said and done.
But 50.7 said no, and that's the majority. So do you want it put back to the people, or if you manage to get the result chucked out, what is the best case scenario?
Best case scenario for the government, because I don't think another referendum in this context would likely to please anybody. I think the right thing would be to say there's a very large sentiment of yes, an extraordinary number.
But there is a larger sentiment of no based on the results.
Based on the results. Wait till the High Court judge says those results are invalid, Lisa.
But as it currently stands, and that's all we've got to deal with at the moment,
no, it's not.
These
we've
are
got
the
a
numbers.
High Court review of the case. It doesn't die with the referendum. The Referendum Act makes provision for this check and balance to occur. That's what we're actioning.
Do understand, Blair, but without that decision yet, what we currently are looking at is a majority saying no. So you don't think it should be up to the people to decide? It
is up to the people. The election itself was a statement by the people. Pretty much Labor and Greens capitalised on the cannabis vote to get in, notwithstanding the fact that there's probably people out there who'd say, no, they didn't.
So that's sufficient mandate.
I've been doing this a long time, Lisa, and I can tell you every damn election we've had, the cannabis vote has had a play around the 5% mark. Now it's having a play around the 50% mark. It's time we all grew up and realised, let's put this to the people. We elected them. They're called MPs. They go on a select committee. The select committee hears evidence, not the trollop that was put out by the likes of, say, Nope to Dope. That's where it stands, and that's putting it to the people because the people elected those people to make a decision.
And that's Blair Anderson there. The Electoral Commission has confirmed it has until Friday to respond to the High Court, but it declined to comment any further. It is 5:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Really keen for your feedback on that one. Do you want to have another crack at it? Are you keen to change your vote? Should the referendum be tossed out altogether? And if they're successful with this High Court action, would you rather see the government just push ahead with drug reform legislation? You can text us on 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. I'm also interested as to whether you were confused by the information that was in the public domain. One of the few liquor licensing trusts is being given a rap over the knuckles by the Ombudsman. The community-owned trusts controlling the liquor trade in West Auckland have received 2 scathing rulings for withholding documents and conducting business behind closed doors. The Portage and Waitakere licensing trusts hold exclusive rights to operate liquor-led bars and bottle stores in West Auckland, an arrangement that continues to raise the ire of some who say it's an outdated monopoly, depriving them of freedom of choice. Nick Trubridge reports.
They are the liquor lords of West Auckland, and for years, opponents to the Portage and Waitakere Licensing Trust's so-called monopoly have rallied against its use of exclusive rights to sell liquor over the West's counters and bars. They say there's just 10 bars serving more than 250,000 people. Now, those opponents have won a victory of sorts. Chief Ombudsman Peter Bosher has given the trusts, whose members are democratically elected, a dressing down for withholding documents and going about its business in secret.
The trusts are supposed to be a democratic organisation. There's little oversight of them from central government or anyone else, really. And the way that they're supposed to be held accountable is through people holding them accountable through the democratic processes. So being able to attend the meetings and understand what they're doing and getting access to their reports and through official information requests and so on. If they're not meeting those obligations, then we can't hold them accountable.
That's West Auckland Licensing Trust's Action Group spokesman Nick Smale. His group wants more competition when it comes to buying booze in West Auckland. He believes the trust has been doing its business behind closed doors for no good reason, and it appears the Chief Ombudsman agrees. A June 15 opinion released by Peter Bosher shows the trusts were unjustified in refusing to release copies of their annual report prior to their 2018-2019 AGMs. And now another rap over the knuckles. In a decision released on November 24, the Chief Ombudsman has told the Portage Licensing Trust to say sorry for another transgression, which saw it refuse to allow the public to be present during an item on its submission to a review of the 2019 elections. We've voiced Peter Bosher's findings.
I've recommended that the Trust provide you with an apology that acknowledges the process it followed was not adequate, and to review its practices and guidelines for excluding the public.
The public were kept out because the Trust believed information about the submission posed a risk of pressure or harassment. Bosher disagreed. Mr Smale says he appreciates there are some commercial sensitivities the trusts need to keep secret. Despite operating what he calls a monopoly, the trusts do still compete with companies selling liquor outside West Auckland. But he says the tendency has been to keep the public in the dark.
It is important that they get that balance right. And at the moment, the balance is way in the favour of just doing everything behind closed doors. And for this to function effectively, we need to be able to hold them accountable.
The Trust's Chief Executive Alan Pollard says a review has been held and it is now producing agendas outlining why some business must be conducted in private.
Look, I think we accept that the processes could have been better and that this was a matter of process on this particular item on the agenda.
Meanwhile, Mr Smale and the West Auckland Licensing Trust Action Group's stance on the trusts and their exclusive rights to sell alcohol remains the same. It's pressing on with a petition to try and trigger a referendum on whether the trust's setup should stay.
I think we'd be better off in West Auckland if others were allowed to get the full set of liquor licences and we had competition out here like we do throughout most of the country now.
Meanwhile, Mr Pollard says the Trust's position is clear.
If the community decided that it wanted to look at another model of operation, there is a process to do so. But I believe strongly in the licence and trust model and the benefits that it gives to the community of West Auckland.
So, the foreseeable, you and your mates may be hard-pressed to find a late-night watering hole in Auckland's west. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
A lot of you are getting in touch about the issue of the legal action that's being taken. Of a group of people, they want to throw out the results of the referendum on the Cannabis and Control Bill. A lot of you getting in touch about that. 50.7% voted against a specific bill, this listener says, not against cannabis. Laurie's got in touch to say it sounds like the pro-drug group are taking a leaf out of Trump's playbook. And another person says, we had a referendum and I voted against on good faith. And another listener says, so now what? Best of three? Jason, though, says, I spoke to co-workers after they proudly said they voted no early. We spoke about benefits, etc. And after the conversation, they said, I wish I could change my vote. I didn't know any of that. And another person has got in touch to say, push ahead with reform. The gentleman you just interviewed was so right. Well, sounds like it's as split as it was on the day of the vote. Keep your feedback coming. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It's a year this week since the deadly Whakaari eruption. It prompted a massive nationwide health response, ranging from ambulance officers on the ground to the country's top burns surgeons. 47 people were on the island at the time the volcano erupted. 22 people died and many received serious burns. Nearly a year on from the eruption, Jean Bell takes a look at the health response and a warning her story contains some distressing details.
Hamilton resident Jeff Hopkins and his daughter Leilani were on board a tour boat that had left the island just before it erupted. The boat turned around to rescue who they could from Whakaari. Both are first aid trained and helped victims during the excruciating return to Whakatane. Jeff says there was little they could do aside from clean people's burns and offer reassurance and hope.
The one person that I spent most of the time on the way home who was telling me I'm not going to make it, and to be able to give them some hope and reassurance of, yeah, you can make it, you will make it, your better days are ahead, many years ahead.
Shane Cronin, a professor of volcanology at the University of Auckland, says the burns were horrific.
The burns that kept on burning, and that's the problem.
He says there was a cocktail of chemicals in the volcanic material that added to the injuries. There was fluorine, which acts as a poison in the body, while sulphur reacts with oxygen and water to produce more acid.
Along with the hot material, scalding hot material with steam and also acid within it, the fluorine and the sulphur were basically then ongoing acids.
He calls the circumstances of the eruption, where people were on the island on a hot summer's day, a worst-case scenario.
So everybody was wearing t-shirts and shorts, and yes, they had masks and they were quite effective actually, remarkably effective, and they had some hard hats and so on, but it was a hot day and a lot of skin area was uncovered. Had the eruption occurred on a colder day or had it occurred in wintertime when people were more heavily clothed, there would have been a much, much better outcome.
The patients were first taken to Whakatane Hospital before being dispersed in hospitals around the country, including Middlemore, Canterbury, Waikato and Hutt. Dr Vanessa Thornton, clinical head of Middlemore's emergency department, says the first 48 hours after the eruption were very busy. The National Burn Service is based in the hospital and staff race to get prepared to care for victims by organising staff and equipment. She says the need for hospital-level burns care outstripped the capacity available in New Zealand, and 19 people ended up flying home overseas for treatment.
We were lucky because many of the patients were from Australia, and so we were able to repatriate a number of the patients to their hometowns. It's a long, complex operative and rehab process, so for those patients it would be better to be at home for this.
Adele Saunders, a psychologist at St John, travelled to Whakatane a few days after the eruption to support staff. St John's staff are familiar with treating burns, but the eruption presented a whole new challenge.
This one was a bit different in the sense that there's a sheer number of patients that were involved, patients that had sort of a range of severe to life-threatening burns all in one go.
It was also the first volcanic eruption they had dealt with.
The smell, the sulphur is something that I've heard lots of people talk about. Their understanding about the impact of that sulphur. So burns is one thing, and they probably all managed burns and jobs and roles before. but this was different because there was an added component of sulphur.
She says that made for a challenging working environment.
So very different. There would have been much more sort of pain, the smell, so there would have been lots of sort of emotionally provocative parts of the job that people would have struggled with in the moment and days after.
She believes no one is immune to the impact of trauma, and staff are encouraged to seek support.
To say, hey, I'm really struggling with this, as opposed to holding on to it and probably festering on it a bit.
Overall, Ms Saunders says the eruption has shown how resilient St John's staff are. In Whakatane for Checkpoint, Jean Bell.
Now to Invercargill, where dreams for a new charity hospital are one step closer to reality, with the first strike of a sledgehammer. The mission is to transform a suburban pub into a hospital where Southlanders who aren't covered by the Southern District Health Board can access colonoscopies and dental care for free. It's the brainchild of late cancer care advocate Blair Vining, who died last October after a year-long battle with bowel cancer. And as Tess Brunton reports, it's been a long but rewarding road.
Everyone looks a little bit worried about my sledgehammering skills. Right. Oh yes, I've got a hold.
Good work. Blair Vining's wife, Melissa, struck the first blows as the former Clifton Club Inn shifts from housing kegs to colonoscopies. It was donated by the Invercargill Licensing Trust in February.
Are you going to make me hit some more, Laura? Yeah, I will. Should have bought some Powerade.
Melissa Vining says it's a momentous day.
I did feel a little bit emotional when the first time that I swung the sledgehammer, because I was thinking of Blair and how he'd be so proud.
The hospital will be home to an orthopaedic-grade operating theatre, a dental suite, about 8 recovery beds, a community room, consulting rooms and a memorial garden for Blair Vining. Melissa Vining says the hospital will be able to adapt to the greatest need of the community.
Southland Otago has the worst rates of bowel cancer in New Zealand, and one of the contributing factors to that is the low intervention rate, so not being able to access colonoscopies. So the overall goal will be to put an end to the suffering of many Southern Otagoers and actually having a direct impact, because if caught early, bowel cancer can be cured, and that's the reward. We're helping people in our community.
So far, the community has raised roughly $2.2 million for the hospital through fundraising and donations. Melissa Vining says they would need another $2 million to complete the build with full labour costs and another $1 million for equipment.
I know firsthand what it feels like when the person you love needs help and is unable to access it in the public system. It is a state of trauma, panic, constant concern, and for a large amount of our patients, getting that colonoscopy, just getting certainty, makes things a lot easier to cope with.
The hospital will be staffed by medical professionals volunteering their time, with other volunteers filling in the other vital roles. It should be able to help about 12 people a day, depending on the availability of specialists and demand. About 110 volunteers have signed up, but the hospital's general manager, Helen Robinson, invites tradies and medical professionals in the region to get in contact with the hospital. She says the community support has been phenomenal.
People, I think, have been touched by cancer. Everybody, sadly, in this day and age has some experience. So I think that's why it's been so important to people. I think also this year, COVID has been a pretty testing time for everybody. So I think it's also just been really helpful for businesses, for schools, for groups of people that have got together and done something really positive, whether that's been raising money for us or just participating in Red, Black and White Day.
The kitchen will stay, but the jury is out on the bar, standing in the former keg cool room with grimy pipes sticking out and beer lists on the wall. Helen Robinson says it will soon play a very different role.
So eventually this room will be used as a consult room, so this is where people will be seen by one of the surgeons prior to their procedure, and it will also be used hopefully in the future counselling sessions, so it's a multi-purpose room.
A $100,000 donation from Rio Tinto, the majority owner of nearby Tiwai Point smelter, added to the celebratory mood. The smelter's chief executive and general manager, Stu Hamilton, says the donation will help to fund the build.
So as we've gone through looking at the impact that we can have on Southland, and you look at the amazing response and I guess Southland engagement in this initiative has been brilliant. The impact that it's going to have on Southlanders for many generations to come is huge, and really keen for us to be able to support that initiative.
Bonnish Consultants Managing Director Boyd Wilson says the former pub is a standout site for the new hospital.
It had great bones to start with, and we can repurpose the building rather than completely demolish and restart. The scale of the site allows the development to future-proofs if there is ever any further need for an additional theatre. And I think the other thing too is time, is that it saved probably at least 12 months in time from starting with a blank canvas.
Melissa Vining hopes the new charity hospital will be open for business before Christmas next year. In Invercargill for Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, Tane.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, allegations of abuse by staff and students at Auckland's Dilworth School are detailed at the Royal Commission. Supersized weta are released on Motahi Island with a special mission, and the dogs providing comfort and company for the elderly in Canterbury. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. A lot of you getting in touch about the Cannabis referendum and the legal bid to get the results thrown out. You can text us about anything on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us at Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now.
The Prime Minister is calling on the organisers of the $100,000 cash drop to apologise. The event held by the Safety Warehouse was marketed as New Zealand's largest mass cash drop, and actual money would fall from the sky. But outraged attendees in Auckland picked up mainly vouchers resembling $5 notes. Jacinda Ardern says she cannot fathom how anyone would think it was a good idea. Meanwhile, Ms Ardern will appoint one minister to lead the response to the Royal Commission report into the Christchurch mosque terror attacks. The 800-page report will be released at 2 o'clock tomorrow, and it contains a number of recommendations. The Prime Minister says changes have already been made to firearms laws and work started on hate speech laws. A nurse working in Whakatane Hospital when Whakaari White Island erupted says staff could never have prepared for the traumatic circumstances that confronted them that day. This afternoon, almost 1 year on from the eruption, health staff have shared their memories responding to the event. Nurse Morgan Sando says the emergency department and the rest of the hospital came together and drew on their inner strength to provide each patient with exceptional care. A leading epidemiologist says he's surprised and disappointed the Health Ministry is slashing the number of COVID updates it provides. The ministry sends out daily briefings with infection numbers and other information, but from this week that will be cut back to 4 times a week. Professor Michael Baker from the University of Otago says the daily update reminded the public to be vigilant. President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, has been reportedly moved to hospital after testing positive for the coronavirus. Mr. Giuliani has been leading the president's efforts to overturn the election result. Those are the headlines. Our next news and sport update is at 6.
Kia ora anō, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and Nicholas Poynton has joined me in the studio to talk business. Nicholas, so there's a new company that wants to get its name on the main board at the NZX. Who could this be?
Yeah, look, the head of the NZX did tell us the last time a company listed that there would be a flurry of activity in the run-up to Christmas, and today it was announced that another aged care and retirement village operator is going to list this week. That's Radius Care, which is sort of fitting given that one of the companies that delisted this year was the retirement village operator MetLife Care. So Radius, they were set up in 2003 as 22 facilities in 2 villages around the country, and it cares for about 1,700 residents. The company won't be raising money as part of this listing, which is perhaps unusual, but the company founder and chairman, Brian Cree, says this is a step towards future growth that will allow them to tap the shoulders of local investors when it needs to raise that money to scale up and fund future growth. So it's the 3rd new listing of the year. There's going to be a 4th next week. That's the New Zealand Rural Land Company.
And that qualifies as a flurry.
Well,
you know, in terms like, because they're as rare as hen's teeth, aren't they?
I know.
These
We're going to
listings.
have 4 listings this year. I think we had 1 last year. I'd have to go back through our archive to see how often this happens. But look, when I spoke to Mark Peterson the last time we chatted about this, like, why is there so much interest? One of the things he puts it down to is the success of our NZX in light of COVID-19. And also, a lot of companies, they're struggling to get money into their business. They probably don't want to take on any more bank debt. They're private equity. We've had plenty of stories talking about the difficulties of getting foreign capital into your business. So the next option, the most, the option that makes sense is going to the local share market. So we will just have to see what happens here. Look, there might even be more to come. We just don't know. Just wait and see at the moment. But we'll have more updates from that listing later this week. I plan to go to that.
It's funny because that interestingly leads us on to the next story that you're going to talk about today, in some ways, investment. So if you're under 30 and can't buy a house, who is suggesting that you take your money and go buy a business instead?
Oh yeah, I'm sure it's the type of thing that will annoy and frustrate an already disillusioned group of people under the age of 30 about rising house prices. But the small business brokering firm known as ABC Business says younger people locked out of the market, they should consider saving for a business instead. So they released this data today, and it shows that for the year to date, the average price of an SME, a small to medium-sized enterprise, is $650,000, about that. Compare that with the average price of a house, which is $725,000, and yet the returns for an SME is $215,000 a year on average. That's 6 times more than the annual returns or capital gains you generate from owning a property.
On average, but did they tell you what the failure rates were for business? Because they're pretty high, aren't they? New companies starting up.
Well, yeah, they are. And look, when I was speaking to the managing director, Chris Small, he was making this sound all incredibly straightforward and easy. So I put this to him. I used myself as an example. I said, look, I'm under the age of 30. I am, by all accounts, locked out of the housing market. And if I had the money, I probably wouldn't go out and buy a business because, look, there's a risk in running a business. You've got to manage staff, there's liabilities, there's all these things with compliance, things that I know nothing about. Even though I am a humble business reporter, I don't know how to run a business. And to that, ABC says, sure, there is more risk, but they don't think that there's 6 times more risk. So look, I don't know how you calculate that, but they seemed pretty confident when they said that to me. And he says there's plenty of people out there who can help you run a business. And in his opinion, this is the managing director, Chris Small, he says, look, it's better to start now at 25. So by the time you're 35, you'll be a wizard at running a business. So look, I'd be interested to know what people think about this, people under the age of 30.
Okay, 2101 on the text. Let's ask them.
Yeah, and look, and just finally, I did have to ask him, how does this all work? Because most people, when they decide to buy a business or start a business, they'll borrow against assets they already have. Most people under the age of 30, they don't have a house to borrow against. And he said he used to work in a bank, and the way business loans tend to work, there is a much higher deposit required, reflecting the risk involved, usually about 50%. If you're going to take one of these loans, you need to have a sound business plan. And there's also something called a General Security Agreement, a GSA, which is like a mortgage. And he made sense of all of this using this example. He says the average house price in Auckland is $1 million. So that means if you want to borrow 80% from the bank, you're going to need $200,000. The average business is $650,000. Half that is about approximately $300,000. So he reckons you're already on your way there. You're not too far off.
Oh, I do want to hear what people think of this and this suggestion. If you're locked out of the housing market, you should instead go out and buy a business if you're under the age of 30.
Yeah, well, so yeah. Oh, interested to hear what people have to say. Or whether or not people have actually gone out and bought a business. Who knows?
Instead of buying a house. Hey, what were the markets doing?
Yeah, so the NZX, it's up 25 points to 12,631. Our dollar is at 70.4 US cents. It continues to hover around there. 94.7 Australian and 52.4 British pence.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business News. Historical abuse suffered at the hands of some fellow students and staff at Dilworth School have been outlined to the Royal Commission into Abuse in Care. Neil Harding, who was 55, went to the Anglican boarding school in Auckland in 1977. A number of men are currently before the courts, charged with indecent assault relating to historical abuse at the school. Our reporter Andrew McRae has been at the Royal Commission.
Neil Harding was 11 years old when he started at Dilworth. He describes it as a harsh military-style establishment that brutally punished those who didn't conform immediately to the Dilworth way.
It was brutal, And I saw quite quickly there was injustice, there was all sorts of stuff going along that was a real shock to me.
Mr Harding says the boys were not treated as individuals and were often referred to as just a number. He says the culture in his dormitory was a free-for-all.
The older kids did whatever they wanted to the younger kids.
How could they get away with doing that?
Well, I just don't think we were supervised adequately, I'd say.
Right.
The degree of supervision allowed the boys to do what they did. It was a consequence of whatever the supervision was or wasn't.
He says a lot of the violence was student on student.
You know, we'd get night raids where asleep in bed in a dorm of older boys would attack the dorm of younger boys. Each one would pick a bed and you'd wake up being violently punched and kicked through your bedding, which didn't provide much protection. Going to sleep at night, there was a sense of terror of, am I going to be violently assaulted and woken up while I'm sleeping?
Mr Harding says there was some irony in a book he studied in his English class.
You know, my time at Dilworth was really much a Lord of the Flies kind of environment where the big boys made up the rules. But the difference was, for me, was that we were being predated upon by staff.
He says he started to receive the attention of the chaplain, Peter Taylor, in what he now knows as grooming. At one stage, he was invited to Taylor's home.
I had to sit down on the ground in the corner of the room, cross-legged, and then he sat down cross-legged directly facing me, and I was trapped. And my alarm bells were something didn't quite feel right about that.
And then what happened next?
Well, then he proceeded to place his left hand on my right knee and started to move his hand up my thigh. So I grabbed his hand, pushed it away and leapt to my feet and got out of there.
He says he fled in fear but didn't tell anyone.
The culture of the school was cop it and shut up. I was conditioned to not saying anything about anything to anybody, and so I do remember racing back to my house, feeling terror of the fact that what I thought was safe wasn't.
Another one of his teachers also displayed abusive tendencies. The man told him he wanted to cane him and be watching him closely and would pounce as soon as he did something wrong. This came when he was caught playing cards during prep.
Canes were lined up like pool cues in a pool cue rack, and he took them one at a time. I hope he picks the thick one. The thin one hurts more, but leaves less of a bruise. But no, he picked the thin one and proceeded to cane me. It was again a feeling of processing, a combination of fear and terror, that someone that's supposed to be protecting me, that has a duty of care, responsibility, for me is playing some sadistic game.
Neil Harding left Dilworth after 2 years, going on to Takapuna Grammar. He says the next 5 years there were happy and safe. For Checkpoint, ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, has been diagnosed with coronavirus today and reportedly moved to hospital. The former New York mayor is spearheading the president's attempts to overturn the election, and him being out of action could derail that campaign. Meanwhile, American health authorities are still working out how and when they can distribute an approved vaccine. The BBC's Lebo De Seco reports.
That's what we want to find out.
He's one of Donald Trump's closest allies. Now Rudy Giuliani is the latest in the president's inner circle to be diagnosed with the coronavirus. He's been spearheading Mr. Trump's efforts to overturn the results of November's election. This was him on Wednesday at an election hearing in Michigan, asking a witness to remove her mask.
Would you be comfortable taking your mask off so that people could hear you more clearly?
But for all the bad news about coronavirus, on Sunday, some hope. 2 vaccines to be reviewed in the next 2 weeks for emergency use, and they could be given out within days afterwards.
What we've said is within 24 hours of FDA green lighting with authorization, we'll ship to all of the states and territories that we work with, and within hours they can be vaccinating.
Healthcare workers and nursing home residents will be among the first to be immunised, then essential workers, and finally the general public.
We may start to see some impact on the most susceptible people probably in the month of January and February, but on a population basis for our lives to start getting back to normal, we're talking about April or May.
There's still a long and perilous road to travel. On Sunday, warnings that the escalating surge in infections could be the most trying event in US history.
The vaccine's critical, but it's not going to save us from this current surge. Only we can save us from this current surge, and we know precisely what to do. So if you have loved ones that you want to protect, you have to follow these guidelines.
All this in a week where the US hit the grimmest of milestones, the highest ever new infections, hospitalisations, and a life lost nearly every 30 seconds.
And that was the BBC's Lebo De Seco with that report. The first international travellers into Melbourne since June have flown into the city and been driven to hotel quarantine. Victoria has now gone 38 days without a new case, and the return of its hotel quarantine program is a significant step forward. Lapses at hotels were believed to have been responsible for the state's massive outbreak. The ABC's Samantha Donovan reports.
8 flights are carrying 253 Australian citizens and permanent residents into Melbourne today. They're coming in from Singapore, Colombo, Doha and Hong Kong. Speaking at Melbourne Airport, the Victorian Police Minister, Lisa Neville, confirmed things are going to plan so far.
I think one of the important messages to Victorians today is that they can absolutely be assured that this program has been completely reset. This is a completely different program from the time someone boards a plane overseas right through to the day that they leave hotel quarantine 14 days later.
Ms Neville emphasised the changes that have been made.
No private security. We are the only state in the country that will no longer use private security in hotel quarantine. These roles are being done by Victoria Police with the assistance of the ADF and also our specially trained residential support officers that have been through extensive training and recruitment processes. Secondly, we have embedded infection prevention and control right from the start of this program. In terms of our staff, they are exclusive staff, so they are working for the program. They work at one site only and work in one job only. Every single staff member, they all get tested daily.
Victoria has reached 38 days straight with no community transmission today, and Victorians are anxiously hoping nothing goes wrong with the new hotel quarantine program. It's being overseen by the Commissioner of Corrections Victoria, Emma Casser.
This morning's gone really well. So we finished our simulations here about 9 o'clock last night, and the team have done an incredible job at welcoming back return travellers this morning. Today we have a full day, so our last flight is arriving about 11:30 tonight.
Victoria's new hotel quarantine program got a couple of guests earlier than expected when 2 travellers from Germany avoided quarantining in New South Wales on Saturday and flew on to Melbourne. The Federal Minister for Trade and Finance, Simon Birmingham, clarified the pair's status on RN Breakfast.
So I'm advised that there is a mother who is an Australian citizen and her son is a German-born Australian citizen. So they are both still returning Australian citizens.
And that report from the ABC's Samantha Donovan. It is 11 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the program so far tonight. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Dozens of giant weta have been set free on Motuhi Island in Auckland's Hauraki Gulf as part of efforts to bolster numbers of these rare and threatened creatures. A breeding and conservation program involving Auckland Zoo, DOC and local iwi has seen about 5,000 of the prehistoric-looking insects returned to the pest-free islands since 2012. Auckland Zoo's Ectotherm's team leader, Don McFarlane, says 70 adult-sized wetapanga were let go on Motuhi Island a few days ago, and the colossal plant munchers play a vital role in keeping the forest healthy.
In terms of specialness, they're certainly endemic to New Zealand, found nowhere else on the planet. The Department of Conservation considers them nowhere near doing as well as they should. So they've been listed as a species that needs action and help by the Department of Conservation. Giant because they're in the Guinness Book of Records, actually, for one of the world's largest insects. There are very few that are above them in weight, maybe a few tropical beetles, but these guys are in the record books at being at 70 grams, which is getting on for the size of a saddleback or takahe bird, which is one of their main predators. So as an adult, there aren't many that can take them on.
What was it like to let them all go?
Well, if you're a conservationist like me, then it's a realisation of a dream. This is the sort of stuff I envisaged getting involved in as a kid, so it's very personal for me. But for the species, it's just another sort of suite of reassurance, if you like. We've done this many times across many islands in the Hauraki Gulf, and the more we can do it, the safer they're likely to be. So we want to continue doing this until we see that these islands that we've released the wetapanga on, at least 10 years after the last time we do it, when we return, we still see them there, then we can consider them established.
How difficult are they to breed?
Very difficult to compare with any other species. I've worked with snails from Tahiti and field crickets from the UK. I'd say that actually the actual breeding, the moment itself, if you like, is actually, you can fairly much, well, you can rely upon. They're not too difficult to get together to do the act, if you like. But then rearing the young, that's when the commitment comes in and the resources, because they can produce many, many hundreds of nymphs or babies, each female. We collect 6 from the founder island, if you like, Hauturu. So we can have in our wetter breeding room over 2,000 individuals. But to get them to 6 months, say, 2,000 hungry males across the line so that they're ready and strong for a release is a huge commitment. So we're talking 3 days a week, 8 hours each day, and we have a specialist browse team which collects all the food they need. So it's quite a commitment.
And how important are they to the ecosystem? You know, you're putting them back on these islands and you're wanting to re-establish them. What is their role?
Yeah, well, it's safe to assume they were there before humans arrived, so they belong there. So that's a good response to that. This is something that was missing for around 180, 200 years. So it's probably a safe bet to put them back. They've been called forest regenerators. They've been called the mouse of New Zealand. They are, like many other wetter species in New Zealand, they belong in the forests. They return nutrients to the soil through their gigantic poos. I think one of the largest poos for any insect. When they hit the ground from the trees, I can tell you can hear it. Certainly in our room with 2,000 wetter, you can hear them all almost pooing in synchrony. So
seriously, Don, I'm sorry to pause on this, but it was in bold and italics in the press release. Seriously, can you hear it raining poo when the wetters are going?
Honestly, when you go in our wetter porticom at night, when they all come out, and you've got 2,000 hungry mouths chewing, digesting and pooing, I can promise you can hear, amongst the cacophony, poo hitting the deck, yes.
But that's the good stuff, isn't it? That's what you're saying.
Exactly right, that's it. That's their contribution to the nutrient cycle on the forest floor. So that was missing before. So a forest is only healthier with the addition of wetapanga. They're
quite creepy though, aren't they, Don?
Oh, well, the standard stock response is beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You can learn to love anything, right? And I think that comes along with an appreciation of all manner of things to do with wetapanga's life history, how they use the forest, how they move, how they breed. There's just their whole life cycle is fascinating, and with fascination comes appreciation. The more you know about an animal, the appreciation comes. I think they have a certain beauty in my eyes.
Once you drop them off on the island, do you do anything to keep an eye on them or measure numbers and see how they're going?
Absolutely, that's a crucial element to any breeding program. How are they doing? You don't just walk away after the last release. So we go back to the islands on which we release these wetapanga, and we engage several tools which help us basically track their development. And that is actually a long-term commitment, because it's the visits are based around the life history of the weta. We release weta at a certain age, and we return to the islands when we know they have definitely lived out their lives, died, laid their eggs, and we're expecting to see young. And when we go out, we are basically doing spot searches with torches, and we're also starting to use other devices like tracking tunnels, which I'm sure you're familiar with. They're a kind of a plastic tube with an ink card in the middle, and anything that walks across it, attracted in by bait, leaves footprints, which are very recognisably wetapanga. And we're also trialling these brand new critter pick units, which are also baited. They're a black box. Weta are encouraged into them, and a photo is taken. It's uploaded to the cloud, so we can remotely see what's visiting those critter picks and get an idea of whether they're there, what stage they are, and hopefully numbers.
And that's Don McFarlane from Auckland Zoo, and we'll put those pictures up online if you were listening. There's some amazing pictures of these gigantic creatures with hands in the photos for scale. Slightly creepy, I think. Loneliness and isolation are known to have a profound impact on people's well-being, particularly for the elderly. Around the country, there are many home visiting services, but Aged Concern Canterbury is offering something a bit different: visits from dogs. The service is currently on trial in Canterbury, and our reporter Rachel Graham went to meet some of the people and pups taking part. Here's her report.
This is Lewis, a 6-year-old Shih Tzu, failed show dog, then rescue dog, and now an aged concern visiting dog. Lewis was the first dog to be matched up with a person wanting a visit. Each week he spends half an hour with 88-year-old Margaret. Lewis's owner, Linda Cohen, says the two have a ritual.
Margaret sits in her lazy boy, puts her sheepskin on her lap. Lewis jumps up and he gets patted for 30 minutes on a good day. And he thinks that all his Christmases have come at once. And Margaret talks to Lewis, and it's just lovely, actually. She loves him. She absolutely loves him.
Margaret's daughter Karen says her mother became profoundly deaf about 6 years ago and is unable to lip read, so has become very socially isolated. But visits from Lewis have brought new delight to her life.
It's just opened up so much. It's something with being so isolated, it gives her something to look forward to. Every week she gets up and she's already watching for them coming down the road, because Linda's only a couple of minutes away. And it's just, made such a big difference in her life.
She says for her mother, having a visit from a dog rather than a person is a lot less intimidating.
There's no expectations from the dog to Mum, and Lewis doesn't know that Mum's deaf, and Lewis, the dog, accepts Mum as she is, and Mum loves Lewis, and it works really well.
The project is overseen by Aged Concerns Beverly Mason. Her dog Toby makes the initial visit to a home to ensure it's well set up for a dog visitor. She has 6 dogs on her books, 4 of which are matched with a person. Beverly does a bit of matchmaking to make sure it's a good connection.
Of course, the dog needs to engage with that particular person too. So that first initial visit is vital for all parties. It's for the dog owner. The dog itself, does it like the person? Does it like the property? And we go from there. So there's always a trial visit.
She says it's wonderful to see the difference a dog visitor makes.
It has been a great pleasure to witness and observe the changes within that person just after the initial visit. Actually, they get a light and a smile on their face, and they say, "When are you coming back?"
Karen suspects there are many other lonely elderly people in Canterbury who could also benefit from a visit from a friendly pooch.
Lewis is great. It's just a great idea, and if more people are aware of it that are just sitting there lonely, and maybe for half an hour they could just rub a dog's tummy and feel the benefits of it. It's just, it is uplifting, and it's opened a new world to Mum.
Aged Concern Canterbury would love to hear from anyone who thinks their dog might make a good visitor, or anyone who would appreciate a new dog friend. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Rachel Graham, TNA.
And we'll put Rachel's story online with some beautiful pictures there filmed by Nathan McKinnon. You can see the dogs we're talking about. On the cannabis referendum, lots of you getting in touch. Michelle says, the voters of New Zealand were cheated. There should have been another box to tick on the voting paper, decriminalisation. Someone else says, no means no. And Clive reckons, in no way would I be convinced to legalise recreational use of cannabis. Maybe in 5 years' time to consider this again, but the time isn't yet right now.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Kynwyn Curtis. The Prime Minister says the organisers of the $100,000 cash drop should apologise. The event, held by the Safety Warehouse, was marketed as New Zealand's largest mass cash drop, and actual money would fall from the sky. However, tempers flared as attendees found they were mainly picking up vouchers resembling $5 notes. Complaints have been lodged with the Commerce Commission and the police are reviewing the event. Jacinda Ardern says she's seen the reports of the impact on the event of summit participants.
I cannot fathom how at any point someone would think that that was a good idea. Clearly it was not. And it's caused harm, it's caused hurt. They should apologise.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. And the Prime Minister will appoint one minister to lead the response to the Royal Commission report into the Christchurch mosque terror attacks. The 800-page report will be released at 2 o'clock tomorrow. It contains a number of recommendations. Jacinda Ardern says changes have already been made to firearms laws and work started on hate speech laws. She says one responsible minister will be appointed. Ms Ardern says the Royal Commission investigation was to find out what happened, but also how to avoid such a tragedy ever happening again. The Federation of Islamic Associations has already released its submission, saying the Muslim community was failed by government agencies. A Whakatane hospital emergency nurse says the deadly Whakaari White Island eruption made for the most intense, traumatic and horrific experience in her career. Almost 1 year on, healthcare workers have shared their memories of responding to the injuries. Nurse Bronwyn Ives says healthcare staff had one job to do, that was to help people in the best way they could. She says her colleagues showed extreme professionalism, knowledge, skill and passion. Ms Ives says she often has moments where she stops and thinks about the victims.
And although I hope never to see or experiencing anything like the Whakaari eruption again, I'm extremely grateful that I was able to be a part of that team and personally do my utmost to provide the very best care to those people.
Whakatane nurse Bronwyn Ives. A drug reform advocate is claiming the Electoral Commission repeated poor information on the cannabis referendum and wants the result thrown out. A group of more than 350 people is asking the High Court to void the vote on the Cannabis and Control Bill, which was narrowly defeated. One member of the group, Blair Anderson, has told Checkpoint that inaccurate information generated confusion among voters.
The failure to correct the misinformation, which Andrew Little had announced at some time prior to the referendum commencing, that they would have a strong check on misinformation. And of course, there was no such provision to do that. In fact, it was specifically excluded.
The Electoral Commission has until Friday to respond to the High Court. It's 4 minutes past 6. President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, has been moved to hospital after testing positive for the coronavirus. Mr. Giuliani has been leading the president's efforts to overturn the election result. Lebo De Secco is in Washington.
Mr. Giuliani has repeatedly been exposed to the virus through contact with infected people. It's just 2 weeks since his son Andrew and Donald Trump Jr. both tested positive. Mr. Giuliani has been travelling the country meeting with lawmakers as the Trump team try to overturn results in key states. At a hearing on Wednesday in Michigan, he was heard asking a witness to remove her mask, a request she turned down.
The BBC's Lebo De Secco. A fertility clinic which destroyed a woman's embryos after she had asked for them to be returned has been censured by the Health and Disability Commissioner. The woman and her husband gave birth to a child in 2009 after undergoing fertility treatment. The 3 remaining embryos were placed in storage. Catherine Hutton reports.
By law, embryos have a 10-year storage limit. In 2017, Fertility Associates contacted the woman and told her the embryos were due to reach their legal expiry in 2018. The woman opted to remove them from storage, but the clinic removed the embryos and destroyed them without telling the woman. Fertility Associates apologised for the error and said it was a one-off case. Only around 3% of patients reach the 10-year storage limit. It has since updated its policy and forms for destroying embryos and was ordered to apologise to the woman. This is Catherine Hutton.
Elderly Christchurch people who are feeling lonely have a new option if they want to make use of a visiting service. They can now be visited by a dog. Age Concern Canterbury is trialling a dog home visiting service called Companions on Pause. The Chief Executive of Age Concern Canterbury, Simon Templeton, says the dog service might suit people who feel uncomfortable being visited by a person. Mr Templeton says the project works by carefully matching a suitable dog and owner with a person who wants to be visited. In sport, the Black Caps coach Gary Stead won't rush to bring another player into the Test squad should New Zealand cricket captain Kane Williamson miss games for the birth of his first child this month. Williamson was the Black Caps' best batsman in the opening Test against the West Indies. The second Test starts on Friday, followed by matches against Pakistan. Stead says the players he selected at the start of the series will be able to step into Williamson's place in the batting order if required.
Young is probably a natural replacement. He was named in our 13 originally. You don't select and non-select on one innings at a time, so he missed out. He didn't get quite as many as he liked, but I know he will learn from that experience in the first Test match.
Black Caps coach Gary Stead. Rugby governing body SANZAAR has hailed the centralised format of this year's Tri-Nations as a success. The 6-week tournament in Australia, won by the All Blacks, was the first time one country has hosted all matches. SANZAAR boss Ari Marinos says in the future the Rugby Championship could be run the same way. Undefeated former world champion boxer Floyd Mayweather will return to the ring in February for an exhibition bout against YouTube personality Logan Paul. 43-year-old Mayweather last fought professionally in 2017. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Colin McCall talks about the Auckland Theatre Company's plans for 2021. Zoe George looks back on the weekend's sport. Nick Bollinger samples the first release from Sun Ra and his orchestra in 20 years. And Montrose of Penrose, the most beautiful book I've ever seen about a foundry. I speak to the foundry's owner, John Abbott, and the book's designer, Grant Alexander, on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, mostly cloudy with patchy light rain. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, high cloud with a few spots of rain until tomorrow afternoon. Waitomo to Wellington, including the central high country, also Waited Upper. Periods of rain, some heavy falls from Taranaki in the central high country to Wellington. Buller, Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds, periods of rain, heavy falls in the west from this evening. The remainder of Marlborough and Canterbury mainly fine with increasing high cloud. Westland and Fiordland, scattered showers turning to rain in Fiordland for a time overnight. Otago and Southland, fine spells, isolated coastal showers spreading elsewhere tomorrow morning, and the Chatham Islands mostly cloudy with occasional light rain. It's 8 minutes past 6.
Kia ora anō, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Labour is still holding on to huge public support while National is languishing, according to the latest One News Colmar Brunton poll. Tonight's poll puts Labour at 53%, National at 25%, ACT at 8% and the Green Party also on 8%. New Zealand First are still registering 2% in support and the Māori Party also gets 2%. As for preferred Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern is out in front on 58%, while Judith Collins is on 12%. David Seymour sits at 4% and Christopher Luxon makes an appearance on 2%. To help us decipher all of this, our Deputy Political Editor Craig McCulloch joins me now. Craig, what does this mean? No buyer's remorse as yet from voters, it would appear.
Yes, good evening, Lisa. It does not look that way at all. A pretty ho-hum result here on the first poll of the 2020 term. Labour, of course, they came in on a high into this term. They had a stonking great election victory. They had 50% a majority government. This puts them even above that on 53%. They won't have any complaints about this at all. In some ways, it's surprising given that they came in to this term and very quickly ran up against a housing crisis. There's been a huge number of headlines, a huge amount of focus on this issue of housing and house prices skyrocketing. And there was some suggestion, well, it definitely looked like it anyway, that the government was caught off guard by it, that they didn't really know how to respond, that they were somewhat flat-footed. They'll be very pleased with this result, that it does not seem to be getting, that issue does not seem to be getting too much cut through, that it doesn't seem to be hurting them yet. Of course, Jacinda Ardern said that she would be a Prime Minister who governs for all New Zealanders, and I guess that's homeowners and non-homeowners alike. So nothing bad in this result for the Labour Party.
So then what have they arguably done to deserve the bump in numbers? Is it just keeping their heads down and not doing anything to annoy anyone before Christmas?
Well, I guess there was the big portfolio rollout. We saw the ministers appointed, new faces and new jobs, although I think it's questionable probably how much that goes through into voters' minds and how much they take that into account. I think they probably look instead for mistakes and fumbles, and that's where that begins to have some effect on the polls. We haven't seen any mistakes or fumbles as yet, and so that's probably why it hasn't flowed through. Keeping an eye too on the legislation, which probably has more of an impact. There have been some big changes that they've made straight away. There were the tax changes in terms of the top tax rate. They declared the climate emergency. There was the doubling of sick leave, and then more recently the pill testing, making that completely legal in festivals for the upcoming summer period. So they have been hitting the ground running. They have made some changes over the last week, and perhaps the voters are looking at that and saying, that's what we elected you to do, now you're doing it.
Well, let's look at the other side of the house then in national. So 25%, right, which is round about what they got actually in what is arguably the poll that matters, election day, 25.6%. So stuck there, it appears, in a rut. How long will MPs and party faith be happy with that?
Well, the contrast is incredibly stark, isn't it? It's national. They had their shocker result on election night. They came in there at, around that 25.6% mark. Judith Collins kept her job. On results like this, if there's not much change, that becomes more and more tenuous. Of course, her saving grace is that there's no one in the party right now who wants it right now. And although this poll probably isn't going to change anything there, there's big question marks as there's more polls to come next year and the year after. Perhaps this poll isn't the straw that breaks the camel's back, but those ones to come, if Judith Collins doesn't make any difference there in terms of bringing that poll up, bringing National back and putting National back in a position where it might have a shot at power, she's going to be in real trouble. Another big sign for her, you mentioned it before, a big worrying sign for her is the preferred Prime Minister number. She actually fell in this result tonight, just down on 12%. And the appearance of Christopher Luxon in that result too, also curious. Him popping up there at 2%, she'll be keeping a close eye on him. And people in that caucus, MPs in that caucus, will be thinking, and the wider party too, as the time goes on, if that poll number doesn't change, not just the preferred Prime Minister, but that solid number, the party vote, if that doesn't change, people will, more and more attention will start to shift away from Judith Collins and on to Christopher Luxon.
So the Greens holding steady at 8%. They'll be happy with that, won't they? Because they've come in and they're carving some space for themselves. Even though they've done a deal with Labour, they seem not to, have lost any of the faithful as a consequence.
Yes, there were some question marks. Some people in the Green Party, supporters, activists, were quite concerned about the fact that they signed up to this cooperation agreement with Labour, despite the fact that they have no real influence, no real power, just because of how the numbers have fallen. Yet they signed up to the cooperation agreement nonetheless, and it does not seem to have been a muzzle on them. It does not seem to have held them back from speaking their mind, as some of those activists were concerned it was. They've spoken out on tax, they've spoken out on housing, they continue to go on about this, their calls for a capital gains tax, for a wealth tax. So they definitely are differentiating themselves, and there's a lot of potential there. I think particularly as Labour tax back to the centre, as they move back and try and consolidate consolidate and hold on to this massive 50% result, the 50% that they got on election night. 53 is where they're at now. And as they continue to do that, there's probably some space opening up on the left where the Greens can capitalise and monopolise on that and maybe even grow their vote.
Thanks, Craig. That's Craig McCulloch, our deputy political reporter there. And that's the first poll post-election. Labor on 53%, National on 25%, Greens and ACT holding steady on 8%. Tears were shared at Whakatane Hospital today as staff remembered the harrowing experience of caring for victims of the Whakaari eruption almost a year ago. 22 people died following the eruption on December the 9th last year. Whakatane Hospital and its small emergency department was inundated with victims who were then diverted around the country. Many victims were foreigners, but some were locals and known by those who treated them. Morgan Sando, an emergency department nurse, remembers staff from across the hospital coming together to care for the victims.
Despite the most traumatic of circumstances of which we could never have mentally prepared for, our team drew on an inner strength and a plethora of skills, compassion, experience, professionalism and so much heart in order to provide each and every patient with exceptional care. This event has had a huge impact on our staff, our hospital and our whole community. Prior to this event, we were a tight-knit team. After it, we were family.
Duty nurse manager Dave Henderson was diverted from his normal job running the hospital to the emergency department.
Everyone that was able to responded to this mass casualty. Medical staff from all specialties, as well as non-clinical staff in support roles. Cleaners stayed on, moving from one bed space to the next, long into the night. Orderlies walked and ran for miles, moving patients and equipment. Security supported staff and arranged for vehicles to be shifted, making way for a second temporary helipad. Te Pou Kōkiri and social workers supported whānau as they arrived searching for their loved ones. The St John volunteers, Friends of ED, were there too, supporting staff with a cup of water as people needed. So many people from all parts of the hospital and wider health community doing everything they could to help. The thing that really stands out for me is the compassion and humanity that the whole community displayed. I know that some staff are still affected by this event, but they should know that they all contributed to give every patient a chance.
Emergency clinical nurse specialist Bronwyn Eves says she'd never seen anything like it in her nearly 2 decades working as a nurse.
I've had 18 years experience as an emergency nurse, and what I saw that day is the most intense, traumatic and horrific I have ever experienced. We had a job to do to help those people in the best way we could. We worked in teams, all focused on doing our jobs to the very best of our ability, knowing that the other teams working alongside us were doing exactly the same. My colleagues showed extreme professionalism, knowledge, skill, strength and compassion. And although I hope never to see or experiencing anything like the Whakaari eruption again, I'm extremely grateful that I was able to be a part of that team and personally do my utmost to provide the very best care to those people.
And that was staff from Whakatane Hospital speaking about caring for victims in the aftermath of the Whakaari eruption. A lot of you are getting in touch after I spoke to Nicholas Poynton. Some investment advisors are suggesting that people invest in businesses rather than housing if they are shut out of the market because of the price. Lorna's got in touch to say, don't do it. I've been a business owner for 20 years in New Zealand. If the staff don't kill you, the inland revenue will. Someone else says she can't live and grow a family in a business. What a strange and blinkered suggestion. But Daniel from Auckland reckons I'm 32 and I would consider buying a business instead of a house. Someone else, though, is pointing out that it's not quite that easy. They say, I tried to buy into a business a few months ago and was told they would not lend me anything without a property as security. And Gary's got in touch to say, I am keen to own a business instead of working for other people. Do keep your feedback coming. It is almost 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Nearly 600 properties in Napier have been officially flood damaged, but there are fears more haven't been reported. Trees and slips blocked roads, lampposts toppled over, debris fell from cliffs and walls crumbled onto cars in the flood, which happened 4 weeks ago. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Tom Kitchen reports.
The chaos caused by the flood is detailed in a new Napier City Council report. As of late last month, 115 properties were uninhabitable and 386 have been damaged but are still livable. Napier Mayor Kirsten Wise thinks the numbers could actually be higher.
That is the ones that we are aware of. So there will be a number of flood affected, in particular, private residences that wouldn't necessarily have been reported through to council for any reason.
Large parts of Napier's water system are only built to deal with a 1 in 5 year rain event. This year's was a 1 in 250 year deluge. Sewer manhole covers popped up in the worst affected areas, releasing heavily diluted raw sewage into already flooded streets. Napier hasn't been able to upgrade all of its systems since new regulations came into force in the 1990s. Ms Wise says the impact was difficult to cope with.
We experienced an event far beyond what we, within our network, had the capacity to deal with. So obviously there's no way we were ever going to be able to cope with a 1 in 250 year event.
The number of flood evacuees peaked at 173. As of the end of last month, 147 people were still staying at the council's emergency accommodation as there was nowhere else to go. Dee Peno from Hawke's Bay Properties looks after rental homes. She says the aftermath of the floods has hit housing hard, especially with more tradespeople in town.
The motels are full from all the either the beneficiaries that can't find accommodation or tradesmen coming from Auckland to fix. There's just nothing to rent.
With at least 580 properties damaged, there's still a long wait for normality to return in Napier. For Checkpoint, called Tom Kitchener-Ho.
Nitrogen can no longer hide. A new interactive map has been launched today showing which rivers, lakes and estuaries are under pressure from agriculture. Swiping left shows total nitrogen levels in excess of current regulatory rules, while swiping right reveals what might happen if nitrogen levels reduce in years to come. Jonathan Mitchell has more.
The state of our waterways laid bare. Ag Research's principal scientist, Professor Richard McDowell, says the map shows nitrogen loads exceed current regulations in 9 out of 15 regions. That includes parts of Waikato, Manawatu, Whanganui, Marlborough and Canterbury.
There will be some places that may not be able to meet those regulatory limits. And I guess our hope is that the map can help people to start thinking about what, lower intensity land uses could apply in those areas.
He says the information is critical to farmers in catchments with high nitrogen levels and can help them decide whether to continue investing in mitigation actions or consider making changes to land use. High nitrogen levels in water can increase algae growth and make water unswimmable and undrinkable. Spokesperson for Choose Clean Water, Marnie Prickett, isn't surprised by the data, highlighting it as a reason to push the government's fertiliser cap, which takes effect next year.
We've got some people applying quite extreme levels of nitrogen fertiliser, up to 375 kilograms. Really, that's excessive. It's not needed for any economic reason. And so we can bring that down to that 190 kilogram per hectare per year cap in a very short term.
She says it won't just benefit the waterways, but also help the climate now the country has declared a climate emergency. Ms Prickett adds the rural sector needs to show some strong leadership about making across-the-board improvements.
We need to hear from those agricultural leaders that we are now on a path to de-intensification, that we're on a path to putting the health of our environment first so that it can support our people. And that leadership really needs to come from the agricultural industry, because what they do when they don't put that message out is that they override the good work of those farmers who are trying to do the right thing by allowing things like that excessive fertiliser use.
While many waterways are badly polluted, the map shows that without efforts by farmers to mitigate runoff, the problem would be much worse. Strategy and investment leader at Dairy NZ, Dr David Berg, Fergus says widespread improvements have been made by farmers in the last 25 years.
So for dairy specifically, we know that nitrogen would have been 45% higher, and I think phosphorus 98% higher between 1995 and 2015 across individual farms if those mitigations hadn't been carried out.
He says the government's policies allow for changes over a generation, and regional councils are now working with iwi and local communities to define how nitrate standards will be met. For Checkpoint, call Jonathan Mitchell-Aho.
The UK and European Union have been trying to hammer out a trade deal in what's been described again as last-ditch negotiations. The UK left the EU in January but has enjoyed largely unchanged trade arrangements through a transition period ending on January the 1st. The BBC's Chris Mason has more.
Back in Brussels, the UK's chief negotiator, Lord Frost, arriving for what's described on the British side as the last roll of the dice in trade talks with the EU.
We've been working very hard to try and get a deal. We're going to see what happens in negotiations today, and we will be looking forward to meeting our European colleagues later on this afternoon. Thank you very much.
There is frustration in government at what is seen as the EU's failure to understand the importance of the UK's newfound independence.
We want to be doing a free trade agreement as a sovereign equal with the European Union, and so anything that undermines our ability to control our own waters, for instance, or undermines our ability to make our own laws isn't something we can accept.
5:30 Tonight, EU sources suggest agreement could be near on fishing rights. The UK government source said there had been no such breakthrough, and the issue of fair competition and how any agreement is enforced remain sticking points. As Lord Frost arrived at the European Commission, he was reminded that the French are worried about not being able to catch as many fish.
Lord Frost, what's your message to Emmanuel Macron?
And supporters of the French government will tell anyone who'll listen they'll say no to a deal they don't like.
And that was Chris Mason reporting from Brussels. As Europe continues to battle a second wave of COVID-19, countries have been agonising over how to control the spread while allowing the lucrative winter sports season to begin. Germany, Italy and France plan to keep their ski resorts closed over the festive period, but non-EU member Switzerland's taken a different, more open approach. The BBC's Imogen Folks has this report.
In the famous Swiss resort of Grindelwald, a brand new ski lift is being opened. The Eiger Express will whiz skiers up the mountain in just a few minutes. It cost $500 million, and it should pull in the crowds, except there's a pandemic on. Ski resorts were incubators of the virus at the start of this year. Switzerland's neighbours, France, Germany and Italy, have closed their slopes for Christmas. But as he cuts the red ribbon on his new lift, Urs Kessler, head of Grindelwald's Mountain Railways, won't bow to pressure.
I was a little bit surprised about the whole discussions. It would be the same during summertime when we would say, Italy, you have to close the sea, the beach. Or we would say the same to France. And I think every country has to do what is the best for the country. And that is the decision of Switzerland. And we are happy that we have this decision.
Des contrôles aléatoires à la frontière.
Others are less happy. When a French journalist asked France's Prime Minister Jean Castex if he could ski in Switzerland at Christmas, he got short shrift.
Je suis français, je veux aller skier en Suisse, je tombe sur un contrôle, il m'arrive quoi?
No, you won't. Or if you do, you'll be quarantined.
We are now approaching the renowned Eiger North Face, close enough to touch.
Back on the Eiger Express, it's not exactly business as usual. Trying to keep everyone happy, the Swiss government has ordered new restrictions. Lifts can only be 2/3 full, masks are a must. The mountain railways are the biggest employer in this region, so for Urs Kessler, pandemic or no pandemic, this is a good business move.
It's certainly bringing back the money. And I'm 100% sure we are back in the Champions League of winter sports. And that means we are at the highest quality level for the future. And nowadays, you offer high quality, you have a chance for the future.
Many Swiss hope to spend Christmas on their skis, but others fear their country could be blamed for a third wave. Over in another famous resort, Zermatt Mayor Romy Biener reminds visitors that for more than a century, the Alps were the place for people to go to restore their health. So why not this winter too?
We're trying hard at the moment to improve every possibility that is been offered. So with the distance, social distancing, masks, whatever. Because we believe we have to live with COVID-19.
And so Switzerland is going it alone. Its slopes are open despite the pandemic. To some it might look like madness, but there is method here. If the Christmas and New Year period goes well, above all, safely, Switzerland stands to make a tidy profit, while its neighbours are left empty-handed.
The BBC's Imogen Folks there. On the subject of whether we need another crack at a cannabis referendum, this listener says yes to another vote. It seems crazy to not control supply, education and the tax of cannabis when we're moving at breakneck speed towards decriminalisation. Another person, though, says, I thought the information provided in the leaflet, which came with general election voting papers, was very clear as to what would be in the cannabis bill. There was no confusion. Someone else says half wanted it changed. Time for a mandate to do more. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Labour Party is still significantly ahead of National in the first political poll since the election. The Prime Minister warns a vaccine rollout won't necessarily coincide with the reopening of the borders. Almost a year to the day, a nurse working in Whakatane Hospital when Whakaari White Island erupted says staff could never have prepared for the traumatic circumstances that confronted them. Many parts of the country will experience high temperatures in the coming days, with some areas reaching close to 30 degrees. Our next news and weather is at 7.